So now let's talk about the Naira. We've seen movement since Friday, positive movement. I don't know if it's applaudable, but we see positive movement. It keeps our hope up, but we still have a long way to go. Remember where we're coming from. Actually, we're coming from the dollar going for 115 Naira. That's where we're coming from. At most 200 Naira. So let's see where we were yesterday at the close of trade. We saw in NAFEM there was 2.63% increase on the value of the Naira. So it closed at 1,453 Naira 28 kobo, opened at 1,492 Naira 61 kobo. But I guess the more impressive, I don't know if it's the more accessible one, is on NAFEX. NAFEX closed at 1,382 Naira 35 kobo. This is the 2-month high for the Naira. It looks close to what Goldman Sachs said, but we know that expectation for the Naira, looking for the fair value, they've been put about 700, 900. We'll talk more about that. So yesterday on NAFEX, the Naira gained more than 10% to close at 1,382 Naira 35 kobo. This is the best we've seen in months, but I guess there's not yet time to relax. Let's talk more on this. Finding the fair value of the Naira with Mr. Femi Onokore is the Managing Director of Nusa Nanke Solutions. Joins us in the studio right now to discuss this. Mr. Femi, thank you so much for your time and good morning.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Yeah, good to be here. So we're looking for the fair value of the Naira. We know that Goldman Sachs has put it about 1,002 in 12 months. But we know that other international bodies are talking about between 700 and 900. And we see the number right here. We see yesterday it closed at 1,382. This is the best we've done in 2 months. But it's still not what we're used to. It's still biting hard, on Nigerians. Do you see this trend continuing? We've had it for 5 days now, since Friday last week. The Naira has been gaining. Do you see it continuing?
Okay, so what's interesting, first, I think we should congratulate, the CBN government for all they've been doing with respect to the appreciation in the currency. They made some pledges and they're pulling their weight. So most of what we've seen has been a remarkable change in terms of regulatory reforms and operations efficiency, right? They're plugging holes and places that we've been leaking. So this trend is expected to continue, right, reasonably. However, there's also the caution regarding the fair value, as you mentioned, of what the Naira should be. What the CBN is striving for at the moment is to ensure stability in the value of the currency for the FX. Now, stability has a very important role to play in terms of growing the economy, because what it means is that investors can make projections. They have, a mind frame that, okay, if I'm putting this amount within this frame, even if I adjust for inflation and all, this is what I expect the Naira
but we haven't heard an outlook or target from the CBN.
Yes, they have been a bit silent on it, and I think they don't want to commit until they get all their ducks in line. Because aside from regulatory policy, you can see a lot of house cleaning also going on, at the CBN, trying to put everything together, and that's where we also should have a sense of caution, because they don't want to mislead the public.
But we have a target for inflation.
Yes. No, because inflation is a consequence of other actions. So you can actually set a target with respect to monetary policy.
In Nigeria is a consequence of factors that are not controlled by the CBN, that are outside the monetary policy.
Oh, okay. So essentially, inflation everywhere in the world is a consequence of a lot of things that are out of the control of the regulator. What the regulator tries to do is to stem it, to manage it, so that the burden of inflation does not affect the economy too negatively. So what the CBN is trying to do right now, because our inflation figures grew from we are 31.7%, I think, thereabout, and this is the highest in 28 years. Because of that concern, the CBN is trying to manage it. So the first thing they're striving for is stability in the exchange rate numbers. And then once they do that, they're also pushing for sustainability of whichever rate it is. This will be driven by the fiscal policy, conditions that they're putting in place, which is going to affect sectors like, manufacturing, services, and the rest of them. All those things, because GDP, ultimately, all this growth means nothing if it does not trickle down to the economy and affect people. we can celebrate the nice numbers, but if there is no progressive change or impact in terms of purchasing power of the average Nigerian, then it really does not mean so much. And I think that's why the CBN is also being cautious in terms of giving a particular fix on it. And from this point on, they can now focus on trying to push down inflation, which is what the increase in the interest rate was actually supposed to achieve. And it has actually given the market a bit more stability since that the MPC had the meeting regarding that position. So we see it appreciating a bit more, right? But there is really no fixed and firm position, because interventions will continue until
there was an intervention in the market yesterday, actually.
Yes.
The central bank.
In fact, in the space of a week, like two.
This much,
in the space of like a week, we've had like two interventions. Some banks were selling for as low as 1,310 and all. So it's part of the plan to push down inflationary pressure, control and present stability in the market, and then from there we can take it forward and start looking at the fiscal policy and increasing consumer purchasing power, diversification of the economy in terms of us not importing so much and using.
That sounds like a long-term step.
It's an iterative process, so you will take it small by small. So let me give you an example. You were talking about the FAC allocation. Now what that does is, so they've given the states and the local governments and federal government, they're doing stuff. What the funds are supposed to do is actually to create opportunities in the economy, to open it up so that jobs are created. You can create subventions, you can create credit lines for businesses. That is what that will do. Now, the stimulation of the economy from that grassroots point would actually solidify whatever gains we are having in the
So that reminds me of the conversation that my colleagues in Sunrise Daily were having with the Chief Executive Officer of NESG. And he put it, because sometimes it seems we just look at the federal government, and we forget what the subnationals are doing. Now, FAC has been allocated, the states have their share and all of that. And then there's the security vote, which we don't have so much information on, So what are they doing, building on resources that are inherent in their state? Because all of this would reduce the demand for FX.
Exactly.
Because if we have, for instance, more supply of food, we know that food inflation now is about 37%.
It's
and
really
it's a major
ridiculous.
driver. Then we have imported inflation as a major one, putting more pressure on the naira.
We have currency. What I told you the last time, we're talking about the units of currency inflation, because we don't spend a small unit in our currency. So when you're going to jump up, rather than jumping by 1 naira or 2 naira, it jumps by 10 naira, 20 naira, 15 naira, which is not really reflective of the demand and supply prices in the market. It changes the whole dynamics. We have inflationary pressures coming from restocking risk, as some will say. So they bought at a particular price, is now selling at a higher price,
because of the expectation of what it will cost to
restock. And then that increases the prices inordinately, further driving inflation, upwards. I think what is important right now, and this is where we should hold ourselves accountable as citizens, it's about holding the guys who have been given the responsibility, right? Our representatives at state government level, at local government levels, right? What are you doing with these funds? We should have proper monitoring channels in terms of disbursement, in terms of projects implementation and impact assessment for each of the projects. We should not limit the funding to, there's been a lot of talk about palliatives. We shouldn't limit it to handouts. It's important that people get to earn, right? And they are productive and contributing to the economy. That's what would make it a sustainable structure that we can build, further on.
So I like what you said, that, everybody has to contribute to this. Do we see Nigerians intentionally, except forced because of prices, turning or changing their demands to domestically produced or locally produced products?
There's a saying that's popular: necessity is the mother of invention, right? So what happens is, if the affordable, or the what do they call it?
The available is not affordable.
Yes, then the
affordable is not affordable. The affordable becomes the available or something like that.
So that's what is going to happen. We need to start creating alternative channels for some of these things. We really do not need some of them. If you go back to the 80s, right, and the 70s, the 80s, and you compare some of the demands we have and the tastes we have currently with those times, you would wonder that were we not surviving in those periods? we were surviving. We didn't have such heavy demands on those things. But now a lot of those things have become very normal. They're expected, which is okay, right? However, what are we doing about local alternatives? Yam, literally, when we were growing up, cassava was practically everywhere. Every secondary school student had a farm for cassava. You would contribute your bit to the school's harvest, and then they will sell it and all that. We need to go back to some of those foundational things, right, and start improving local production. Garri was supposedly a staple at a time. Now, Garri is not mentioned as a staple. It's just an afterthought. Right? Rice is more our staple. And remember, we got to this point with rice, even though we have increased our local production, we got to this point with rice from importation. Importation was driven by what? Subsidized USD. So for a long time, we had been living what I would call fake life. Right?
So now what do you say to, we heard the other day the president say they're going to open all borders, or they have opened all borders, and now the CBN has removed the restriction on dairy products, and all of that. And, I don't know, finding a balance could also be difficult because what the government is trying to do is to ensure there's supply. So that will bring down the price. But in the midst of that, what's happening to domestic factories? What's happening to our taste, as you have noted, and how do we find a long-term solution to it?
So it's a yin-yang effect. You need to find a balance. So first of all, in achieving this, there's a need for trade liberalization. Right. The previous administration had a good idea, no doubt about it, that we should ramp up production in some sectors. Fine. But right now, we feel that, okay, we have gotten to a level, and then the level of different scarcity that we have experienced as a country has driven consumer, purchasing power. I mean, people can't really afford a lot of things. So we want to liberalize trade but you need to have strong controls in terms of the liberalization. It's not so much that it's going to be free for all as it were before. You would have to now put proper and stronger controls. What the government will now do on the other end is that while you're scaling and you liberalize the market, you also empower the local manufacturers, right? The local producers. You make it more affordable. You make it more attractive so that they can compete with the other markets. Remember, the only reason those guys have favorable prices, as we say, is because of economies of scale, right? Because of economies of scale, they can create a single unit is cheaper compared to what we will do here. So how do we achieve that? We're talking about issues regarding infrastructure development. We're talking about power, right? Being stable and regular, being dependable for
and
production.
Security.
We're talking about security being something that is no longer, it's not seen as a government thing, it's seen as a collective, right, effort to enforce. Some of the things that we've heard and read regarding the security situation, it seems targeted at the economy to subvert, just create mayhem. Some of these things can be tackled if we can get the different localities, the different communities involved in the security architecture, which is why some governments are pushing for state government, state policing again.
Do you think that will solve the problem?
I think that it's about
because
the structure.
There's also the risk of state governments
becoming
now manipulating exactly.
So it's about the structure. I believe that essentially ideas are not bad in and of themselves. It's how you implement them that is really the issue. So what are the structures that will have guiding state police, for example? Those are the questions we should be having, not if state police is good or if it is bad. What are the fundamental responsibilities? What are the deliverables? Each of these different agencies should have KPIs that are accountable not just to the government, right, but also to the people, such that once you push some of these initiatives out, we can say, oh, no, it's doing what it's supposed to do, or it is not doing what it's supposed to do. And of course, you also have to curtail excess. They say power corrupts. Absolutely. So that's what would happen. If you give too much leeway without the proper structure, without the proper containment to deploy, you have the risk of down the line suffering, such debilitating effects.
All right. So we have to thank you so much, Mr. Nokore, Managing Director of Nosanake Solutions Limited, for sharing your thoughts with us this morning.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
All right. Great.